start with the combined choruses of the Lincoln Bassett School and the John C. Daniels School. And they're going to sing a couple of well-known numbers. Sarah, Carmi? President this year, 1860. In 2 short months, the new Republican Party is going to have its convention to nominate its candidate. Just 3 months ago, John Brown was executed in Virginia. As most of you know, John Brown was born in Connecticut, but many of us think his raid on Harper's Ferry, escape from their bondage, was not the right way to end slavery or to solve a political problem. The problem with slavery will not just go away, as we have all learned. The next president will have to do something about it. And one of the candidates for this election is Abraham Lincoln of Illinois. With the Democratic Party splitting between John Breckinridge and John Bell and Stephen Douglas, the Republicans are likely, or at least more likely, to win. Now, you may have read Mr. Lincoln's speech last week in New York at the Cooper Union, which was published in my newspaper, the Palladium. I was impressed with the clarity of Mr. Lincoln's expression and the moderation of his views. And so I invited him to come here to this Union Hall and stay over with my family. Abraham Lincoln is 51 years old. He's a distinguished lawyer in Illinois. Mr. Lincoln served in Congress in the 1840s and became better known 2 years ago when he engaged Stephen A. Douglas in a series of debates. But this is his first trip to New England. Where Mr. Lincoln has gone, working people give him a warm welcome, and I'm sure you will also. So without further ado, let's welcome to the city of New Haven, the Honorable Abraham Lincoln of Illinois.
more important than any other. Indeed, so much more important has it become that no other national question can even get a hearing just at present. For, whether we will or not, the question of slavery is the question, the all-absorbing topic of the day. It is true that all of us, and by that I mean not the Republican Party alone, but the whole American people, and here and elsewhere, all of us wish this question settled, wish it out of the way. The people of the whole nation agree that this question ought to be settled, and yet is not settled. And the reason is that they are not yet agreed how it shall be settled. The truth is that this question is one of national importance. We cannot help dealing with it. We must do something about it, whether we will or not. I think it is important that this matter should be taken up in earnest and really settled. And one way to bring out a true settlement of the question is to understand its true magnitude.
It was settled. Our fathers hoped for the Missouri Compromise, but it did not stay settled. And the Compromise of 1850 was declared to be a full and final settlement of the question. The two great parties, each in National Convention, adopted resolutions declaring that the settlement made by the Compromise of 1850 was a finality, that it would last forever. Yet, how long before it was settled again? It broke out again in 1854 and blazed higher and raged more furiously than ever before, and the agitation has not rested since. I think that one of the causes of these repeated failures is that our best and greatest men have greatly underestimated the size of this question. They have constantly brought forward small cures for great sores, plasters too small to cover the wound. That is one reason that all settlements have proved so temporary, so evanescent. Look at the magnitude of the settlement. About 1/6 of the whole population of the United States are slaves. The owners of these slaves consider them property. The effect upon minds of owners is that of property, and nothing else. It induces them to insist upon all that would favorably affect its value as property, to demand laws and institutions and a public policy that shall increase and secure its value, and make it durable, lasting, and universal. The effect of minds and the owners is to persuade them that there is no wrong in it.
Slavery does not exist, and we see it through no such meaning. To us, it appears natural to think that slaves are human beings, men, not property, and that some of the things, at least, stated about men in the Declaration of Independence apply to them as well as to us. I say, we think, most of us, that this Charter of Freedom applies to the slave as well as to ourselves. That the class of arguments put forward to batter down that idea are also calculated to break down the very idea of a free government, even for white men, and to undermine the very foundation of free society. We think slavery a great moral wrong. We think that a respect for ourselves and a regard for future generations and for the God that made us require that we put down this wrong where our votes will properly reach it. We think that species of labor and injury to free white men. In short, we think slavery a great moral, social, and political evil, tolerable only because, and so far as its actual existence makes it necessary to tolerate it, and that beyond that, it ought to be treated as a wrong. Now these two ideas, the property idea that slavery is right, and the idea that it is wrong, come into collision, and do actually produce that irrepressible conflict which Mr. Seward has been so roundly abused for mentioning. The two ideas, conflict and must conflict.
It shall be settled. It must be settled on some philosophical basis. No policy that does not rest upon some philosophical public opinion can be perfectly maintained. The policy that supports the idea that slavery is wrong consists in doing everything that we ought to do if it is wrong. I don't mean that we ought to attack it where it exists. To me, it seems that if we were to form a government giving to the slaveholder the entire control where the system was established, while we possess the power to restrain it from going outside those limits. Now, if I saw a venomous snake crawling in the road, any man would say that I might seize the nearest stick and kill it. But if I found that snake in bed with my children, that would be another question. I might hurt the children more than the snake, and it might bite them. Much more, if I found it in bed with my neighbor's children, and I had bound myself by a solemn compact not to meddle with his children under any circumstances, it would become me to let that particular mode of getting rid of the gentleman alone. But if there was a bed newly made up to which the children were to be taken, and it was proposed to take a batch of young snakes and put them there with them, I take it no man would say there was any question how I ought to decide.
Of either Negro. Judge Tony declared that it has not. And Judge Douglas, Negro must enslave the white. There is no such struggle. It is merely an ingenious falsehood to degrade and brutalize the Negro.
Slavery on the very basis on which our fathers placed it, and no other. It is easy to demonstrate that our fathers who framed this government under which we live looked on slavery as wrong, and so framed it and everything about it as to square with the idea that it was wrong, so far as the necessities arising from its existence permitted. In forming the Constitution, they found the slave trade existed, capital invested in it, fields depending upon it for labor, and the whole system resting upon the importation of slave labor. They therefore did not prohibit the slave trade at once, but they gave the power to prohibit it after 20 years. Why was this? What other foreign trade did they treat in that way? Would they have done this if they had not thought slavery wrong? Another thing was done by the same men who framed the Constitution, and afterwards adopted as their own act by the first Congress, held under the Constitution, of which many of the framers were members. They prohibited the spread of slavery into territories. Thus, the same men, the framers of the Constitution, cut off the supply and prohibited the spread of slavery, and both acts show conclusively that they considered that the thing was wrong.
Slavery is wrong, and slavery! Their political adversaries. A great deal of their war with us nowadays is mere bushwhacking. I will take up a few of these arguments. John Brown, you stir up insurrections, you invade the South. John Brown, Harper's Ferry. Some of you admit that no Republican designedly aided or encouraged the Harper's Ferry affair, but still insist that our doctrines and declarations necessarily lead to such results. We do not believe it. We know we hold to no doctrines and make no declarations which were not held and made by our fathers who framed the government under which we live. And we cannot see how declarations that were patriotic when they were made them are villainous when we make them. There was no sorrow for the killed, nor for the peace of Virginia disturbed, you were rejoicing. That by charging Republicans with this, you think you might get an advantage of us in New York and the other states. It was mere bushwhacking. If you think you can slander a woman into loving you or a man into voting for you, try it till you're satisfied.
Another specimen of this bushwhacking, that's shoeshine. At the outset, I am glad to see that a system of labor prevails in New England, under which laborers can strike when they want to. They are not obliged to work under all circumstances and are not tied down and obliged to labor. Whether you pay them or not, I like the system which lets a man quit when he wants to, and wish it might prevail everywhere. One of the reasons why I am opposed to slavery is just here. What is the true conditioning of the laborer?
Sorry.
I take it that it is best for all to leave each man free, to acquire property as fast as he can. Some will get wealthy. I don't believe in a law to prevent a man from getting rich. It would do more harm than good. So while we do not propose any war upon capital, we do wish to allow the humanless man an equal chance to get rich with everybody else. When one starts poor, as most do in the race of life, free society is such that he shows he can better his condition. He shows that there is no fixed condition of the laborer. For his whole life, I am not ashamed to confess that 25 years ago, I was a hired laborer, mowing rails at work on a flat boat. Just what might happen to any poor man's son. I want every man to have the chance and believe a black man is entitled to it, in which he can better his condition, when he may look forward and hope to be a higher laborer this year and the next, work for himself afterward, and finally to hire men to work for him.
All right! Exceedingly desirable that all parts of this great confederacy shall be at peace and in harmony with one another. Let us do our part to have it so. Even though much provoked, let us do nothing through passion and ill temper. Even though the Southern people will not so much as listen to us, let us calmly consider their demands and yield to them if, in our deliberate view of our duty, we possibly can. Judging by all they say and do, and by the subject and nature of their controversy with us, let us determine, if we can, what will satisfy them. What will satisfy them? Simply this: we must not only let them alone, but we must, somehow, convince them that we do let them alone. These natural and apparently adequate means all failing, what will convince them? This, and this only: cease to call slavery wrong, and join them in calling it right. So long as we call slavery wrong, whenever a slave runs away, they will overlook the obvious fact that he ran because he was oppressed, and declare he was stolen off. Whenever a master cuts his slaves with the lash, and they cry out under it, he will overlook the obvious fact that the Negroes cry out because they are hurt, and insist they will put up to it by some rascally abolitionist.
Lincoln's.
Wrong as we think slavery is, we can yet afford to let it alone where it is, because that much is due to the necessity arising from its actual presence in the nation. But can we, while our votes will prevent it, allow it to spread into the national territories, and to overrun us here in these free states? If our sense of duty forbids this, then let us stand by our duty, fearlessly and effectively. Let us be diverted by none of those sophistical contrivances wherewith we are so industriously plied and belabored. Contrivances such as groping for some middle ground between the right and the wrong. Vain is the search for a man who should be neither a living man nor a dead man, such as a policy of don't care, on a question about which all true men do care, such as union appeals beseeching true union men to yield to disunionists, reversing the divine rule and calling not the sinners but the righteous repentant, such as invocations of Washington imploring men to unsay what Washington did. Neither let us be slandered from our duty by false accusations against us, nor frightened from it by menaces of destruction to the government, nor of dungeons to ourselves. Let us have faith that right makes might. And in that faith, let us to the end dare to do our duty as we understand it. Thank you.
I've heard your name mentioned more freely than ever in connection with the Chicago nomination by some who have had other views, whose feelings were previously committed in favor of another. Mr. Lincoln wrote me back and he said, "As to the presidential nomination, claiming no greater exemption from selfishness than is common, I still feel that my whole aspiration should be, and therefore must be, to be placed anywhere or nowhere as may appear most likely to advance our cause."
All right.
Now, we are going to move forward almost 5 years. As we all know, Lincoln was nominated and Lincoln was elected president. Before he was sworn in as president, many southern states had passed resolutions attempting to secede from the Union and gave him no opportunity for diplomacy. A long and bloody civil war followed. James Babcock was very successful. He became the collector of revenue for the city of New Haven, Port of New Haven. Abraham Lincoln never came back to our fair city. Mr. Babcock eventually constructed a large house in Fairhaven Heights, and he moved there from his house on College Street and did very well. And his house in Fairhaven is still in existence today. But Lincoln never came back. Finally, by the time Lincoln was re-elected to his second term, he had used the war powers to proclaim emancipation of slaves in the rebellious states and was proposing an amendment to the Constitution to end slavery permanently throughout the country. The war took its toll on Lincoln because his 1860 campaign speeches seem almost naive in light of the war that followed. We decided to include parts of Lincoln's second inaugural address given at the Capitol in Washington, D.C. on March the 4th, 1865. But before we do that, I want to ask everybody to stand for the playing of our national anthem, and please sing along.
Both parties deprecated war, but one of them would make war rather than let the nation survive, and the other would accept war rather than let it perish. And the war came. Neither party expected for the war the magnitude or the duration which it has already attained. Neither anticipated that the cause of the conflict might cease with, or even before the conflict itself should cease. Each looked for an easier triumph, and a result less fundamental. Both read from the same Bible, and pray to the same God, and each invokes his aid against the other. It may seem strange that any men should dare to ask a just God's assistance in wringing their bread from the sweat of other men's faces. But let us judge not what we be not judged. Fondly do we hope, fervently do we pray, that this mighty scourge of war may speedily pass away. Yet, if God wills that it continue, until all the wealth piled by the bondsman's 250 years of unrequited toil shall be sunk, and until every drop of blood drawn with the lash shall be paid by another drawn with the sword. As was said 3,000 years ago, so it must be said, the judgments of the Lord are true and righteous altogether. With malice for none, with charity for all, with firmness in the right as God gives us to see the right, let us strive on to finish the work we are in, to bind up the nation's wounds, to care for him who shall have borne the battle, and for his widow and his orphan, to do all which may achieve and cherish a just and lasting peace among ourselves and with all nations.
Let's have another hand for all of our performers today. They were great, weren't they? And I also want to thank all of our sponsors for this. We've had a lot of help from a lot of different people. First, the Gilder Lehrman Center at Yale, the Greater New Haven Labor History Association, above all, I suppose, the New Haven Board of Education and the particular schools involved, the Lincoln Bassett School, the New Haven Academy, the John C. Daniels School, and, of course, the New Haven Office of Cultural Affairs, the New Haven Museum and Historical Society, and last and certainly not least, the New Haven Parking Authority, which has allowed us to use this wonderful facility this morning. Thank you all, and thank you for coming.